Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The
The doctors
doctors
are
are
in.
in. So, Roshni, you've been really busy writing and writing for other people more than I have, actually.
Well, writing in general is a good thing. So, yes, we
Yes,
have both been busy writing.
this
But
is
yes,
true.
I have taken on a couple side gigs writing for other people.
So, yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because we've talked about it before. The difference between writing something for yourself, like writing a spec script, and writing something for someone else, either working with a writing partner, or in your case, being like having a boss who's hired you and you're writing for him, and some of the pros and cons of that. Can you talk about like what you find like the best things about writing for somebody else, and what are the worst things for writing for someone else?
Oh, wow. Um, I would say, like anything, it is a double edged sword for certain. Like, the nice thing about writing for someone else is, in theory, you have regular paychecks and, you can walk away from the job and you're not thinking about it all the time. But you do have to worry about things like deadlines. So if you're not like a strong deadline person, you got to meet those deadlines. Maybe their style is different than yours. For example, we've talked about this before. I'm a total pantser.
Mm-hmm.
And in my current job, because we have to, we plot out everything. And that had been such a big adjustment for me to just outline, 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 and then re-outline and re-outline. And I'm like, I just want to get to writing. But you can't do that because there's other elements. There's art, there's mechanics, there's, other team members who have to sign off on things, and you can't just write willy-nilly. So you're beholden to other people and you got to make those deadlines, but at the same time, you can't just go full steam ahead without getting like 10 green lights, which can be frustrating if you're not used to that.
Yeah, and that and,
Um,
and that goes to the fact that you're writing in different industries besides, TV and film. You're writing in
mhm,
comics and games and things like that.
for sure, for sure. I mean, even when we were writing, our scripts, now granted we were just beholden to each other, which was nice, but we still had to make deadlines. We still had to think about how is this going to affect production overall if I change
Hmm.
this, if I change that, if I drop that character, if I make them bigger, what have you, that kind of thing. So we had our own considerations, but because we were the ones ultimately holding the purse strings, we could also, if it sank or swam, it was totally up to us. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Right. The production, thinking about production costs and viability while you're writing, yeah, is usually something you do when you're trying to write something you're going to produce yourself, or if someone else gives you a budget and has constraints on you. If
For
you're writing a
sure.
spec script, like I wrote some action sci-fi stuff, I kind of thought about budget, but I just kind of like went for it because I went like go big, go home kind of thing. Like I knew that that was going to be a project that somebody who had money, who was going to make it, was going to invest in it and do it. And I didn't have to worry about it at that point because it was just the idea and I wanted to write it.
Yeah. I mean, I think for specking, because I've written a couple specs, I never thought about budget. Now, granted, they were like comedies set in reality, so there's not like a huge budget anyway. But I just was like, does this fit into the story? If they needed a script right away, could they slot mine in? I never really worried too hard about like, do they have the money
Yeah.
to make this, script or whatever? But I can see for sci-fi.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to, what you were saying about writing on a team, just like writing for television, you're writing in a writer's room with a group of people, you've got formats, in a
Mhm.
comic situation, you've got a structure to the comic
Mhm.
broken out into certain frames and pages and things like that. And writing for a game has a narrative form, or maybe it's a branched, narrative game. We've talked to some game writers about that. And those are restrictions that are placed on you. So, how do you like, because you've written novels and you've written screenplays for yourself, how does it feel to be writing again? And I know you talked about having to do outlines and stuff, but how does it feel to be writing to a structure like that versus writing your own novel or your own, screenplay?
This is going to sound weird, and I think it's because I come from a journalism background. I love structure and I love deadlines. I know that sounds weird because I don't outline, but I like knowing for example, going back to our journalism days, this story is 10 inches and you can't be bigger or
Mhm.
smaller than it, right? Because it has to fit in a certain space. So you kind of knew parameter wise what you could do. Or this story has to be done by 10 o'clock tonight and it's 5. So you just write. And you don't think like, oh, is this flowery and does it sound good? You just write and get the story out. You know what I mean? And you can polish it later. So those kinds of restrictions I do really well in. And even to an extent, when I write for somebody else, I don't know if other people who are contract writers do this. I have to kind of put on this hat of like, it's your baby, it's your IP. You tell me what is my box, what are my boundaries, and I'm happy to stay in that boundary. I actually find it harder writing for other people when they're like, free reign, and then you give them something and they're like, "No, no, that's not what I wanted. No, no, not that either." And I'm like, "Okay, either I have free reign to go to town, or you have something in mind and you communicate that to me, and I am happy to color with those crayons." But you can't say if you're a boss, like, for example, hiring someone to write for you, you can't say like, "Oh, yeah, do whatever you want." And then when they give you, quote, unquote, "whatever it is," you're like, "Mm-mm, that wasn't what," because I found a lot of times sometimes the bosses want you to be mind readers, and that can be tough.
In the industry in general, usually if you get hired for a project, it's because they've read your work or seen your work
Mhm.
and know what they're getting. And that's kind of like we know the tone and the style and the sense of humor this person has, or,
Mhm.
how good they are at, writing suspense or whatever it is. So they know what they're getting into. I guess it depends on the content you're writing and how well. I mean, these jobs you went into, you were interviewed and they saw your work, so they should have known that. So I guess it comes down to is it the whole creative differences thing, especially like if you're working on a team as well. Have you had any issues with teammates as well, or has it been mostly producer level versus teammates?
I mean, there's always gonna be some butting heads, I think, when you're in a room with a bunch of other people. Like, it's in any job, right? I mean,
Hmm.
and it doesn't matter if you're a doctor or a politician or whatever, you're always gonna have clashing opinions and stuff like that. As far as knowing your ability, sometimes they just have to audition you anyway, and they don't know for sure. I've had a couple situations where they've basically auditioned me, and then they decided, this isn't quite right. One was actually really funny, where I was hired to write scripts, but they needed a certain slang. They needed a certain tone. They loved my comedy. They loved like my sensibility, but I am not Gen Z, and they needed somebody who was really fluent in Gen Z slang. And it was really awkward for me because I kind of find some of the Gen Z slang sort of hurtful. Like it can to me it can go either way. And I guess any slang can be like nice or it can be rude, but for some reason I had so much trouble plugging in the Gen Z slang and then also making it sound positive. And so I just kind of like leaned on one or two phrases that I really understood the meaning of. And finally, the bosses came to me and they were like, you know what I mean? Because they liked what I would write. If I didn't have to put the slang in, it was fine. But it was a style thing. And that's not anybody's fault. You know what I mean? I'm not with that lingo, you know?
It reminds me of the old. I don't think you understand that. Or I don't think that means what you think it means. Is the
Exactly.
phrase right?
Yeah, yeah. It was funny because when they gave me notes, they're like, "We've noticed you've used this one phrase quite a lot," and I'm, like, thinking, "'Cause it's the only phrase I understand." So, yeah. But it was fun. It was a fun job. I enjoyed it.
Cool. I mean, I think we worked well together. I think when we were writing our short films, and I've worked with other writing partners, some with really great success because our strengths balanced each other out. Like I'm really good at structure and logic, and my first writing partner was really good at character and that kind of stuff, and so that works great. But like sometimes you get a teammate or a boss, I guess, that just doesn't get you, so to speak,
Mhm.
and you butt heads, and you actually have to like just part ways. I've done that on a couple projects. I had a really good friend who came to me with that concept for a film he wanted me to help him write, and I kept trying to like you know organize the ideas and the structure and the characters and see where it was going, but we kept running into issues. Like we just couldn't agree to disagree, but we couldn't agree to agree either. So we just kind of let it kind of just kind of ghosted each other a little bit and let it fade out. We still talk, we're still friends, but we just don't talk about that anymore. We're just kind of like, I can't work on this with you because we don't agree on where this story is going, or what the
Mhm.
character, journey should be.
And that can be tough. I mean, honestly though, if you're gonna have those kinds of, personality or creative differences, I'd rather know up front before you get really involved. Like,
Hmm.
it would just suck to, like, write a whole script and, like, start development, whether it's, we're building the comic or we're building the game or we're beginning to shoot the movie, and you still can't agree. Like,
Yeah,
I would rather know up front within, like, the first 2 weeks, "Okay, we're not a good fit, thanks."
yeah. I even had an agent that was interested in one of my projects, and we've talked about this, where he got hung up on a one little thing in the script and couldn't let go of it, and I actually wound up
Mhm.
writing that little thing out of the script totally, but we were never able to reconcile it, and so we wound up not doing anything together. And that's kind of like that. We've done an episode on note taking or taking notes before,
Yeah.
but I had a producer that wanted to write a new ending for a script I wrote that was just totally off the wall, and it's like, and they think it's the best thing ever, and it's never going to happen. Like, I'm not going to agree to that. It's like, you can try to negotiate around it, or you can try to brainstorm ideas around it, but if they're really hung up on it, if that's what they see as the story going forward, it's like, what are you going to do? You
What do you
just have to
do?
walk
Yeah.
away. Yeah.
I mean, and I think that brings up a really good point. When you're writing for other people, whether it's like you're a ghostwriter on, like, say, the Star Wars novels or something like that, if you're into an existing IP, you have to really pick the battles that you want to stake your flag on. I've been in writers' rooms where some writers just are contentious about everything. And every single point they want to argue, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I am very choosy about my battles. If I feel that if taking this out or adding this in is going to kill the entire thing, I'll be like, no, we need to have this. But I come up with a reason why. I don't just be like, oh no, I really want this. No, we need XYZ because it will affect these things down the road.
Hmm.
But for the most part, when I'm in the room and if, the bosses are like, I don't like this, I want this, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you know what? At the end of the day, it's your baby. I'm just executing. Cool. And I sort of it sounds weird, but you have to turn that part of your brain off and just write.
Yeah, and you see that on screen all the time with even with some of the biggest movies that have been out, where you can tell this was written by committee, so to speak.
Yes. Yes.
And you've heard stories of writers saying, like, I want my name taken off of it, or they finish the writing, they take the paycheck, and they walk away, and they don't want to even talk about it anymore,
Mhm.
because they did the job they were paid to do, and they were told to do certain things. You're getting paid, so you have to kind of like decide, am I going to see this to the end, or in some cases they quote unquote leave the project, and whatever that means, and maybe the studio or the producer brings in another writer to finish it. Those are
Yeah,
some of the stories we've heard.
for sure. I mean, and like it I think it kind of comes back to how much I don't
Tell me this: what are your tips for working well with someone who hires you to write?
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, this kind of goes into the same thing. First of all, figure out if you are compatible, you know. Um I've basically auditioned spec scripts for people who, like, even before we got to the hiring process, they, like, lambasted me, and I was like, "I would not write for you even if you hired me." Like, if you're gonna be this brutal in the beginning, and I'm not even talking, like, saying, like, the writing's bad or the notes, but just I had one guy, I sent him, a spec script in his world, like, based off the pilot, and it was one of those things where he said, "You have free reign," and I wrote what I thought a scene would be best, and then the person was like, "This wouldn't fit. How dare you write this? I had such high hopes for you, blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "Whoa, buddy, we're
Wow.
good." If you're gonna say that before you even, like, hire me, that like, it doesn't inspire me to want to write more for you. It tells me you're a red flag and I'm gonna walk away. So, look for those red flags of, like, can I work with this person? Because a lot of times, and I hate to say it, a lot of times, you might run into a situation where they're an ideas person, but that doesn't mean that they know how to execute on that idea, which is why they're hiring you. And you don't
Mm,
wanna get into a situation where they want you to read their mind. You need people who are good at communicating what is on their mind, because if they're like, again, going back to the beginning, if they're like, "You have free reign," and you give them something that was quote unquote "free reign," and then they go, "But that's not what I was thinking." Now you're in already a losing position because you have to keep
mm,
trying to read their mind. I am not a mind reader. That is not what you're hiring me for. You're hiring me to write. I mean, I could be
mhm,
wrong. Maybe some people are really good at mind reading. That is not a skill set I've ever had. So, that I think is the number one thing, is just make sure, like, look out for those red flags before you jump in, and learn how to divorce yourself from the work. Like I said, pick and choose your battles. If you're really like, "This has to be in there," know the reasons why when you go in to argue it. But like I said, at the end of the day, it's a paycheck. It's not your IP, it's not your baby. If they suddenly decide that the sky is purple, fine. The sky is purple, you know? And I will say writing my own projects, like writing the novels, writing my own scripts, does help keep me sane, because at the end of the day, I can be like, "Cool, I'll go work on my own stuff," and it can be however I want it to be, because it's mine. So
mhm.
that helps as well with the
Yeah.
creative balance.
I mean, just like any job you're looking to, take on, you have to do your due diligence. You need to know that the company is sound, that the
Mhm,
people running it are, experienced and know what they're doing. And, obviously in Hollywood, in the film and TV business, if you're working with someone who's successful, they're successful for some reason. It's a little harder to be successful in the entertainment business and not be good at what you're doing. There are those people who fail upward in the corporate world. That doesn't
mhm.
happen as much in the screenwriting world or in the producing world, because like one person has a bad film come out and they could be blacklisted for years in the business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially right now with the current state of Hollywood, like, there's not a lot of jobs. We're still in the middle of a strike for voiceover. I would I mean, this is not necessarily the discussion, but I really think, based off of everything we're seeing economy-wise, strike-wise, the streaming, wars that are, I don't even know what they're going on, and just if the fallout from COVID, I really think at the end of it, Hollywood's gonna be leaner, which means you have to be that much better.
Mm.
Because before, remember the old joke about Netflix will greenlight anything? I think those days are gone. I think you have to be not just on top of your game, you have to be 200% better than anybody else out there, because there's gonna be a lot of artists who are willing to take those jobs. But I don't think there's gonna be as much work, and it's gonna have to be better work. So, as far as writing for other people, you can't get away with being sloppy. You have to be a good communicator, both interpersonal and on the page.
Hmm. And you're competing internationally now
Yes. Yeah.
because they'll pick up stuff from all over the world, for streaming, especially. Doing a spec script for general film production, which is what I'm mostly doing these days, is kind of like a safe haven where it may take longer to get to the success I'm trying to get. It's like me freelancing in my marketing work. When I work for myself, I'm responsible for everything. And
Mhm.
if I make money, if I don't make money, if I get a client, if I don't get a client, it's the same thing in screenwriting. I'm responsible for whether or not I sell a script or don't. What's the quality of the material? Who do I network with?
Yeah.
How do I execute? So just like in any other business, you're responsible for yourself. If you take a job with somebody else, yeah, you might get a paycheck, but you have to play along, and the just like any job has, you might go into a company where, they have a strict process they go through for writing or producing, and editing and everything. And you have to follow that.
Mhm.
they might say every script has to have a dog in it, so, but the script takes place in space, but don't care, put a dog in it, that kind of thing.
For sure. And just because it's a creative job, now you and I are a little more old school for sure. Just because it's a creative job, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't follow best business practices. You know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean? You show up on time, and if you're in person, which I am not for my jobs, but if you're in person, you dress appropriately, and like, I'm very cautious like at my jobs. I don't swear on the job. I don't tell off-color jokes or off-color stories. I still follow best business practices from my time in the corporate world. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that means I'm not as friendly with the people either. I don't tend to I still separate work from personal, you know? I know not everybody does that. Like I said, I'm a little more old school, but I
We're
think that
also we're also both Midwestern.
yeah,
Yeah.
true. But I think that professionalism carries you far because if you look at like some of the news stories, especially like in the recent, I would say right before the pandemic up to now, you know what I'm talking about? All the stories about writers who'd come in and like revamp properties or like they'd, lash out at their fans or whatever. You don't do that. Why would you do that? You don't do that in a corporate setting. Why would you do that in a creative
Mm-hmm.
one? But I think people sometimes get tricked in their mind like, "Oh, it's a creative setting. I can be I can say and do whatever I want." No, you can't. It's still a business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and many a writer or actor or producer has seen a very long dry spell because of things they did or
Mhm.
said,
Yeah.
and this isn't the Hollywood of the 1980s. All kinds of stuff went crazy. Some people are in jail for that now too. So
Yeah, really. Yeah, don't do those things either.
those
That is
things,
definitely not good business or any practice. It's not a good practice at all. But yeah.
yeah. So I would say like my favorite thing about writing for myself is just being able to explore things that I'm interested in. Like
Mhm.
when people bring me topics and ideas for their scripts, I don't necessarily have the incentive to get really invested in their story. And I don't have necessarily the background to do their story, especially that one story I was telling you about a friend who wanted me to write with him. It had gender issues in it. Like, whoa, I don't know if I'm the right person to write this. So picking your projects is really important as far as I don't know if anyone says they can write anything. And people also say they don't want to be pigeonholed. Well, I don't mind being pigeonholed into stuff I like writing. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah. I had a friend, when I first came to Hollywood. Let me see if I can remember how he put it. He's like, "If you take a job" now he was talking acting, but he said, "If you take a job, you take it for one of 4 reasons." Let's see if I can remember what they were.
Mm,
The pay is good, it's a
one,
director or, a writer, somebody you really wanna work with. You
two,
need the, you need the experience for your reel,
mm,
or it's
yeah.
just super fun and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I wanna do it." And he's like,
Oh,
"If you can align with all 4, like, the more you can align with, the better, but at least that should be your guiding principles." And based off of that, there are actually projects I won't do now because they don't fall under any of those categories. I would say writing for other people is the same way. One reason I took the video games job, I segued into it from comics, I wanted to learn how to do that. I'm
mm,
excited to learn how to do that. So yeah, that falls under, I get paid and I get to do something, that I want to do. It's fun. So that's 2 of the 4. Great. So I think when you're looking at other people's work to partner with, ask yourself those guiding principles, you know?
that's
Like,
really cool. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, hey, if you're going to pay me, $100 an hour to write for your spec script or whatever, I will take that job, even if I don't think it's fun. But the more it can align with, the better.
The old do what you love, the money will follow kind of mantra kind of thing.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah. Well, that was super interesting. Do you like to write for yourself or other people, or what are your tips for doing either or both? Let us know. And otherwise, follow us on Instagram and X at WG Therapy and visit writersgrouptherapy.com for more episodes. And we will see you next time.